The background for this presentation and for this topic is the EU Official Controls Regulation, the new one. Article 11 on the new regulation concerns transparency of official controls, and it stipulates that competent authorities may publish or make otherwise available to the public information about the rating of individual operators based on the outcome of one or more official controls. That was kind of that sentence kind of created discussion whether there are such systems in the EU and whether the systems are in line with the new regulation and whether there are similarities or differences. So should we need some kind of guidelines in the EU for the countries who are still under development of such systems. The regulation also says that there has to be rating criteria and there has to be arrangements to ensure that the systems are fair, consistent and transparent. The whole rating process is fair for the business operators. In the EU, we have heads of EU food safety agencies working group, and this HOA group decided that we should establish a working group on this subject to compare the existing systems in the EU, and such working group was established 2015, and Finland and Evira was chairing that one. The aim of the working group was to provide guidance to member states on publishing rating results of food business operators in a way that could facilitate their common understanding in all member states, so that the consumers in different member states could understand what the symbols and rating scores means in different countries. We sent a pre-questionnaire to the EU and EEA member states and had 2 physical meetings in Helsinki. And the report of this working group has been published by the heads of food safety agencies last year. So first, the pre-questionnaire, we got 13 replies, and these are the countries that replied. And among them was England, Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland individually. 11 of those countries had or were planning to have a system for rating FBOs on the basis of their control results. And then we established this working group, which was participated by 12 EU and EEA countries, including Scotland. So we found out in our work that the rating criteria in each of the existing systems was based on legislative requirements and compliance with legislation, and that was quite good. We had something in common just from the beginning. All the systems covered food hygiene legislations, and in some countries also other food safety requirements like labeling were included in the criteria. The scopes of the systems were different. All the countries having these rating systems covered restaurants and other businesses serving food directly to consumer. Most of the systems covered also retail and other businesses selling food directly to consumers. And in 5 countries, the systems covered also business-to-business traders, establishments, and so on. So there were some differences in the scopes. What we also found in that different systems had a different number of rating classes. The number of classes varied from 2 to 7, and all of the scores made a difference between compliance and food safety, and also minor and major shortcomings were taken into account. So there were different classes. It wasn't just that non-compliance was not considered automatically to have health hazard one, but there were different classes for these things. Another thing that was common with all the systems was that one symbol or score was used to describe the general rating. And the symbols used were smileys, traffic lights, numerical grades. These are just examples of different symbols used in different countries. Okay, here's the Belgium system where they doesn't work. Anyway, Belgium system, they have 4-level system, and the blue ones mean the scoring. And in Denmark and Finland, we use smileys. In the UK, there are numerical grades. Then we compared how the results are published in different countries. In 7 countries, the results are published on the website of the competent authority. So there's a centralized system on the website of competent authorities where the consumers can find the results of all the businesses. In some countries, the results are published at the premises of food business operators. That's the way you do in Scotland and we do in Finland. In some countries, also, the individual inspection reports are publicly available, either at the premises or on the website of the FBO. And in some countries, only symbols are published without any explanation of what they contain. Then we compared experiences on using such systems, and for consumers, it was identified that consumers feel that the food safety is improved. They know that when the results are publicly available transparently, that kind of improves the consumer confidence on food safety, and consumers are more satisfied with the performance of the businesses and official controls. And media was identified to be more interested in food hygiene, and that was considered to be a benefit. We discussed whether it's a benefit or not, but in the end it was considered to be a positive thing. Then it was identified that public knowledge and awareness on food safety and the work of official controls was increased, which was considered to be a good thing, so that the public knows that competent authorities are working for them, and it's considered to be a good thing. For food business operators, they were identified to be better in compliant with the legal requirements compared to the time where these rating systems were not used. So when you start to rate the businesses and publish the results, then the operators tend to improve their their performance. Also, the food business operators thought that the official controls were more consistent after starting to use the systems. So it makes the competent authorities to harmonize their controls, which is of course good for the businesses. And that it also improves the dialogue between the food business operators and the inspectors. There's better contact with them. And for the businesses, inspections become more predictable, and the things that they need to correct become more tangible. So these were good things for the operators. In some countries, it was the benefit also covered better insurance premium with higher rating and better liability in other business making, kind of outside the food safety area. And another remark was that low-rated businesses cannot hide anymore. So when you publish the results, then you kind of discover the bad apples, and you have a chance to get them out of the market or get them to correct their performance. On competent authorities and official controls, it is considered that the work of competent authorities was improved. There was a clear criteria for compliance, clear criteria to make your inspections, and the number or the frequency of follow-up inspections was identified to be increased, which means that if a company gets bad rating, they normally want to improve their performance if they are responsible companies, and then they want to have this follow-up inspection to get better rating. And also if the food inspections should be risk-based, and these systems were identified to improve the risk-based controls, so that the overall number of inspections was decreased, but then the inspections that were performed were carried out. They were focused on the risky businesses. Inspectors had different opinions. Some of the inspectors were very pleased. They said that they wouldn't like to go back to the time when there wasn't such system. But in some countries, some of the inspectors were not so pleased. So there was varying opinions. And some of the inspectors thought that there was a pressure to give better rating than they wanted, and they kind of felt that there wasn't always backup from their management, because it also involves resources. If you give worse rating, then you should do more follow-up inspections, and when your boss says that no, you can't, we don't have resources for that one, that kind of might be controversial situation for one individual inspector. And when you build up such system, then you need resources to start with. That was identified in all countries. But when you have the system ongoing, then of course it gets easier. And another remark was that when you use such systems, the lazy inspectors cannot hide anymore. So maybe they are the ones who don't like the system. So some conclusions from the working group. We identified that the main objectives for these systems was to improve food hygiene and safety, and to increase consumer confidence. Then another thing that we want to drive up food business operators' compliance with the legal requirements. And we need to increase transparency for consumers on individual food business operator performance. And another thing that we didn't think in advance was that these systems improve food safety controls, the control systems. The controls become more harmonized and more effective, and also the enforcement gets better. So then we talked, it was clear when we had this working group that nobody wanted to harmonize all the systems, because everybody who had such systems had built their systems on the basis of their own interests, and it was nobody wanted to harmonize all the systems, but we wanted to identify what elements should be included in the systems. So the rating criteria was quite easy. Everybody had food safety legislation there. Then we identified that it would be good if there would be guidance to the competent authorities that would be publicly available, that would ease up the kind of harmonized work within one country. And there should be consistent assessment against the criteria, standardized guidelines, checklist, etc. Then we talked about standardized calculation of the final rating and evaluation. That's a tricky question or tricky thing, and that probably needs some further discussion. But each country had some kind of standardized system for the rating, but they differed between countries. And then we identified that the rating criteria should differentiate compliance, non-compliance, and also preferably minor and major non-compliances. And the criteria should be observable, measurable, evidence-based, and comparable between food business operators and inspectors. So the whole process should be transparent for the business operators, and it was recommended to have guidelines that, on the rating process, to have them publicly available, so the whole process would be transparent. Then the conclusions related to the scope of the rating systems. We recommended that the rating criteria should contain at least the requirements with relevance to food safety, consumer confidence, and public health. So it would mean food hygiene legislation and preferably also labeling. And we identified that the system can be applied to all categories of food business operators, and it's up to the member state to decide whether they want to use it only for restaurants or want to use it all kinds of food business operators, like in some countries, also to business interface. On publication of the rating results, we thought that the symbols that are used should be as far as possible self-explanatory, or there should be some other information easily accessible so that the consumer could get information to clarify what the symbols mean. And open data policies should be promoted. In some of the systems, the symbols were published on map, and when you click the map in internet, then you get more information from that particular premise. So the results should be visible at the premises or the website of food business operator, and preferably also centrally on website of competent authority. And public information should clearly disclose health hazards and non-compliances. And then we recommended that more detailed information on results, we didn't actually recommend, we said that more detailed information can be published, because not in every system it was, the individual inspection reports were not published, but well, it's a good thing if you do, but you're not obliged. Then there were implications to other aspects of food controls related to these systems. In many countries, the rating results are taken into account in risk classification of food business operators. So this rating scoring may have impact on the inspection frequency. If you perform well in the results, then the inspection frequency may be reduced for better performing businesses. And then, like all good working groups, we created some new questions. We discussed about the level of transparency, level of public information. What is the information the consumers really need? And then we discussed that it would be good if the systems used would be evaluated and the impact assessed from time to time. I think at that time there was only one system which had been evaluated externally. Then we discussed how long would the results be valid. If you inspect certain premise every 3 years, how long do you how long the confidence on the latest result kind of lasts? Can you use the same result for 3 years, or should there be some time after which it kind of disappears? And then we discussed whether the systems should include some kind of appeal mechanism if the operator doesn't agree with the results. Should there be some kind of appeal system? Then the calculation of final results. Each system had only one kind of one result, one public result, but there were, of course, if you think about legislation, there are several requirements behind that, which have, of course, have been inspected individually. And how do you calculate which requirement is kind of more important in terms of food safety? Okay, now I thank you for your attention, and hope to be able to answer your questions.
Thank you. We'll move on to question and answers. A round of applause for Leena. Thank you. Grab a seat, grab some water. It is fair to say that there is keen interest in the range of systems out there, and actually it's quite heartening to hear that you've had the same kind of challenges that we've been wrestling with within Food Standards Scotland. What we didn't mention is that there are 2 systems in the UK, and the system in England and Wales uses a 6-point system, so it goes from 0 to 5. Yeah. And in Scotland, we have a pass and improvement required. Yeah. So it's clear that there's quite significant variance across Europe in terms of the levels of categorisation there. Yeah. And one of the questions that's come in that a wide range of systems applying a wide variety of criteria, and arguably the more layers you introduce, the more criteria you introduce, then you run the greater risk of inconsistency in application by the regulator, but also lack of understanding.
Yeah, that's interesting. In Finland, we published the history. I think that's the latest result and 3 previous ones.
3 previous ones?
Yeah, so you get 4 consecutive results are published, but actually we didn't compare that thing.
Okay.
So,
and has that had a direct impact at all on compliance rates within Finland?
Yes, because the good businesses or the responsible ones, of course, they want to have better results. So they want to have the biggest smile, and they want to improve their performance to get it.
Absolutely. I'll look to the audience. Are there any questions from the audience here? Yourself, Brian.
Hi, Brian Campbell from Food Standards Scotland. Enjoyed your presentation, Leena. Particularly keen, one of the last slides you put up, you were talking about planned inspections decreasing and a sort of risk-based focus. As part of the study, was there any work done at all as to the actual consumer scheme itself and how it was linked to the statutory inspection rating scheme, or were there in some member states are they just one and the same?
Sorry, again, can you...
So this is about
to hear.
Yeah, it's quite quiet up here. In terms of having a statutory scheme and the what.
Here in Scotland we have. Sorry, I'm holding it right. Here in Scotland we have the Food Law Code of Practice, which basically that's where the statutory inspection rating scheme comes from for how inspections are, the frequency of them. The consumer scheme itself, the FHIS, is separate from that.
Okay.
So was there any work done at all in terms of how many people actually just used the one system for everything?
Yeah, I think if you have your systems to be evaluated, you could evaluate also that one. So we didn't discuss about that yet. We just said that there would be a need to evaluate the systems and to evaluate also how the consumers understand the results. So I don't know about that.
Okay. Do you have a view, Leena, in terms of mandatory display? Should food businesses actually be legally obliged to display?
Well, if you ask my opinion, well, we discussed in the working group, and some of the countries who've used these systems for some years, they always, in those countries it's required that the results are published at the premises. Some countries which were just starting the system, they were more cautious. But I think in time, when you use the system, then when the operators get used to it and they realize that it's not the end of the world, then they are more willing to publish it.
Okay.
But in Finland, it's mandatory to be published at the premises.
But that's only for business to consumer establishments,
not
business to business.
Well, on the website, at least, if you have business to business operators, they have to publish it on their website. Of course, not.
Okay, so in Finland, manufacturing businesses, producers, they all have the rating scheme as well. And that's not something that we see here in Scotland or in the rest of the UK. Do we have any further questions from the audience? Gentleman in the second row here.
Thank you. John Rowe from Morrison Supermarket, so I'm a recipient of rating systems. The rating systems are moment-in-time inspections carried out by a competent authority. Responsible food business operators carry out their own inspections against their own internal food management systems. I can understand the impartiality issue, but is there any way in which the results of those inspections carried out by the business can be factored into ratings?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah, that's a good. Now I speak on behalf of my experience from Finland, because businesses have asked us that question, and we've said that if their systems, their quality systems, improve their performance, then it should be visible in these results. And then if you get good results in row, then you may get reduced frequency in the official control inspections. So it's kind of benefit for the companies if they have such quality systems that really improve the compliance. And then at the moment we compare how the quality system audits are made, whether there are some elements that we could rely on in our official controls, so that the inspectors wouldn't need to check these things in every visit. So there's clear link, but we don't yet know how to.
So, John, I mean, I can see from your point of view, from the retail display point of view, that you have one bad inspection and you're left with for that establishment, you're left with a score on the door that shows, but there's no recognition within that of all the other audits, assessments, interventions.
That isn't the primary motivation to get rid of the blip. It is more, is there an ability to verify the internal system and make use of that data in a more direct sense, rather than our reward is we get fewer inspections by virtue of good performance that flow out of our own activity. Can they be made more directly?
Yeah, discussed also that if you have such quality system inspection or auditing data, you have the data has to be available for the inspector to check. Then if you cooperate, you may benefit from the quality system audit results.
I suppose there's a bit of a tension there between an incentive there for food businesses to have ongoing and sustained compliance and not having that blip displayed, compared with the balance that you're talking about in relation to third party and additional assurance controls.
We fixate on the scores. Now, whether our customers do is another matter, but we will have very pressing targets for our stores to achieve minimum ratings. But it would be good that responsible businesses could have credit for their own activity, perhaps greater.
Okay, that's a good point. It's a challenge. I think that chimes quite well with the question on the board here in terms of around consumer awareness, understanding and need for rating systems. Was there an evaluation within the working group across member states in terms of consumer awareness?
In some countries have made some surveys on how the consumers understand these systems, but I can't remember the results. In some countries, well, it depends on the country, but normally if you make a survey, then that per se improves the consumer understanding of the systems. If you ask questions from the consumer, he or she starts to think that what are these, and that survey can improve the awareness.
Okay, thank you, John. There was a further question back here, Mick.
Thank you. Mick Park, Animal Plant Health Agency. Have you had any challenges from data protection principles? And the reason why I ask is because we're a regulator at the farm level, but our legal advice is that we can't share the information from our inspections with industry-led farm assured schemes, despite the fact I can see a real benefit in doing so.
In the scoring systems, the legal basis in the EU office is in the EU official controls regulation, so there's no question whether you can or cannot publish it. But if you, that's very clear. But if you speak about the quality schemes, private quality schemes, of course the owner of the data is the operator. Operator decides whether he or she shows the data to inspector. If he wants to benefit from the good results from the private scheme audits, of course it's his interest to show the data. But the competent authority cannot demand to see it. But then
it's an interesting point, though. I mean, I know that we are in the UK and Scotland as part of our regulatory strategy and in discussion with colleagues in FSA as part of regulating our future, the whole issue in terms of third-party assurance schemes is being reviewed. But in terms of a GDPR impact, I would have thought that it would have been in the interests of third-party assurance providers, you know, Red Tractor, BRC, all of that, to ensure that the data is shared with regulators. So as long as there's willing participation in both parties there, I would have thought that that would have mitigated some of the risks from a GDPR perspective. But that's an interesting dilemma that APHA have got.
Yeah, we've got the industry assurance bodies aren't prepared really to engage in that conversation to our satisfaction. So we go out, do an inspection, identify a problem. We'd like to inform the farm assured schemes of that because it helps them understand their systems, but we're not currently able to do so unless the individual farmer gives us permission to do so, which often he won't want to do.
Interesting. Perhaps you and I can take that offline. There was some other questions around here, did I see? Nope. Jackie.
Hi. She just gone. Hi, Jackie McElhinney, Food Standards Scotland. Thanks very much for your presentation. Obviously, there's been a number of schemes in place across a number of member states for some time now, and we're talking about driving up compliance rates, but has there been any work done as to how this is ultimately translating to public health? Has there been a review across the countries where these schemes have been in place for a number of years, and whether it's led to a reduction in outbreaks or food complaints linked to restaurants or retailers?
It's an excellent question, Jackie, thank you.
Yeah.
On the spot, Leena.
Yeah. I think that we come to the evaluation of the systems. Those things should be included if you have an external evaluation, and it's kind of the impact of the whole system to public health. But can't remember whether anybody had already evaluated it. The outcome is that we just recommended that this should be evaluated, and that's of course one point to be included.
I mean, that would be the golden nugget. We've always been searching for the proxy for delivery of official controls anyway, and the actual public health benefit that can be equated to that. But is that a piece of research that the working group are actually going to be looking to develop?
No, this working group has finalized the work, so but maybe there will be some further discussion on this. But that's when we come to the public health benefit. We know that these systems improve compliance. Then we come to the question whether compliance is related to food safety.
Thank you. Any further questions, or can we wrap up this session and go for coffee? I think coffee. Thank you, Leena. That was a fantastic presentation.